It started like any other day, a quiet afternoon in a suburban neighborhood, people going about their lives, running errands, picking up kids from school. But for one woman, what should have been a routine stop at a convenience store turned into a nightmare. She wasn't just any woman, she was the mother of a well-known city commissioner. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All the officers saw was a black woman who, to them, fit some vague description. And just like that, she found herself surrounded by flashing lights, police radios buzzing, and hands reaching for her belongings. She had barely stepped out of her car when the officers approached her. No explanation, no formalities, just demands. "Ma'am, we need to check your bag. Keep your hands where we can see them. Step aside." It all happened so fast. Confusion flashed across her face. "What is this about?" she asked, her voice firm but controlled. No answer. Instead, one of the officers reached for her purse. Her heart pounded. She wasn't a criminal. She had done nothing wrong. And yet, here she was, being treated like a suspect. People in the parking lot stopped and stared. Some whispered. Others pulled out their phones, recording the scene. The officers didn't care. Their minds were made up. Then came the moment that would change everything. As they searched her belongings without a warrant, she stood her ground. "You have no right to do this," she said, anger and fear creeping into her voice. But it didn't matter. The officers didn't stop. That's when she pulled out her phone and called someone who could. Her son. The moment he answered, she didn't even have to explain. He could hear it in her voice, the panic, the disbelief. Within minutes, he was on his way. What the officers didn't realize was that her son wasn't just anybody. He had connections, power, and influence, and he wasn't about to let them get away with what they were doing. By the time he arrived, the situation had escalated. His mother was still being questioned. Officers stood around her, blocking her in. But now the energy shifted. He stepped out of his car, walked straight toward the scene, his face unreadable. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but commanding. The officers glanced at each other, hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty. And then one of them stepped forward. "Who are you?" And that's when everything changed. Because the moment they realized who he was, the moment they understood who they had just wrongly searched, their confidence wavered. Their hands, once firm on their radios and holsters, loosened. Their voices, once full of authority, softened. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. And now the question was, what happens next? The air felt heavy. The flashing red and blue lights painted streaks across the pavement as the commissioner's son locked eyes with the officers. His jaw was tight, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. He had seen scenes like this before, too many times, but never with his own mother at the center of it. The officers hesitated, shifting their stance. It was subtle but noticeable. The authority they had just moments ago, the way they had spoken down to his mother, the way they had taken control of the situation without question, was suddenly slipping. They were starting to realize they had made a mistake, but they weren't about to admit it. Not yet. One of them, the one who had been the most aggressive, straightened his posture and squared his shoulders. "Sir, this is a police matter. I need you to step back." His voice was still firm, but there was something else in it now. Caution, maybe even doubt. The son didn't move. "A police matter." He let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. "You mean to tell me that searching a woman's belongings without probable cause, without a warrant, is just standard procedure now?" The officer glanced at his partner. The other one, who had been a little quieter, shifted uncomfortably. The weight of the moment was sinking in. The son continued, his voice calm but unwavering. "You stopped my mother. You didn't tell her why. You didn't give her a reason. You just decided she looked like someone you were looking for, and that was enough." The first officer's mouth opened slightly as if he wanted to argue, but he hesitated. He could feel the people watching. Phones still recording. This wasn't going to go away quietly. The mother stood there, watching the back and forth. She was still shaken, but she was also angry. She had raised her son to know his rights, to understand the power of his voice. And right now, he was using it in a way that made her proud. But that didn't erase what had just happened. It didn't erase the feeling of helplessness she'd have felt when those officers surrounded her, when they reached into her purse like she had no say in the matter. The son took a step forward, slow and deliberate. "Tell me something," he said, tilting his head slightly. "Would you have done this if she was someone else? If she looked different? Or is this just how you operate?" The second officer shifted again, his hands moving away from his belt. He cleared his throat. "Sir, there was a report. A call came in about a suspect matching a description." The son narrowed his eyes. "And what description was that?" Silence. The officers exchanged another look, but neither of them answered. That was all the confirmation the son needed. His mother let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "You can't even say it, can you?" she said, her voice laced with exhaustion. "Because you know there was no real description, just a vague excuse to justify this." She exhaled sharply, looking around at the people still watching. How many times does this have to happen before something changes? One of the bystanders, a woman standing near her car, spoke up. "I saw the whole thing. She didn't do anything wrong. They just walked up and started going through her stuff." Another voice chimed in. "I was in the store when they pulled up. She was just buying a drink. They didn't even ask questions before they started searching her." The tension thickened. The officers were losing control of the narrative, and they knew it. A third voice, deeper and more authoritative, suddenly cut through the moment. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned. Another officer had arrived, a higher-ranking one, maybe a sergeant. He stepped forward, looking from the son to the mother, then back to his officers. He could tell something was wrong. The first officer quickly tried to regain control. "Sir, we were responding to a call about a possible suspect. We conducted a routine search based on..." The sergeant held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. His expression remained neutral, but his eyes held something else, something unreadable. He turned to the mother. "Ma'am, are you okay?" She folded her arms across her chest, her voice steady. "I was until your officers decided I wasn't allowed to exist without suspicion." The sergeant took a slow breath, nodding. He turned to the son. "And you are?" The son didn't hesitate. He straightened his posture, his voice carrying weight. "My name is..." He paused for a beat, letting the name settle. The sergeant blinked. Recognition flashed across his face. And there it was, the moment everything shifted. The officers stiffened. The sergeant's expression remained composed, but there was a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He knew exactly who the son was. More importantly, he knew exactly who the mother was. The sergeant's tone changed. "I see." He glanced at his officers, his jaw tightening. "Step aside." The two officers hesitated, but they obeyed. The son and his mother were no longer surrounded. The power dynamic had flipped. The sergeant turned back to them. "I'd like to have a conversation about this." The son raised an eyebrow. "Oh, now you want to talk?" The mother, still holding on to the anger and humiliation of what had happened, shook her head. "You should have had that conversation with them before they put their hands on my things." The sergeant nodded slowly. "I understand. But did he? Did he really? Or was this just damage control?" The crowd around them hadn't dispersed. If anything, more people had gathered. This was bigger than just a misunderstanding. This was a reflection of something deeper. And now, the question wasn't just about what had happened, but what was going to be done about it. The son took a step closer. "No," he said firmly. "I don't think you do understand." The sergeant held his gaze. "Then help me understand." The tension was still there, thick in the air, but something else had joined it. Something that felt a lot like the beginning of a reckoning. The silence between them stretched, heavy and unspoken. The mother stood her ground, her son at her side, while the sergeant took in the scene around him. He could feel the weight of every phone recording, every set of eyes locked onto him, waiting. This wasn't just another routine stop. This was something that could spiral beyond his control if he didn't handle it carefully. But careful was a word that had come too late. The damage had already been done. The mother took a slow breath, steadying herself. Her heart was still pounding, but she refused to let it show. "You want me to help you understand?" she asked, her voice sharp with restrained anger. "Fine. Let's start with why your officers thought they had the right to search me without reason." The first officer, the one who had been the most aggressive, shifted uncomfortably but didn't speak. The sergeant glanced at him before turning back to her. "I need to review what happened here, ma'am. If there was a mistake, we'll address it." The son let out a bitter laugh. "A mistake, that's what we're calling it." His voice was low, controlled, but there was no mistaking the anger underneath. "They treated my mother like a suspect. They had no reason, no probable cause, just a description they suddenly can't recall." He looked at the officers, his eyes narrowing. "You expect us to believe that was an accident?" The sergeant's jaw tightened. He had been in law enforcement long enough to recognize when a situation had already slipped out of the department's hands. This wasn't something that could be explained away with policy or procedure, not with a name like the one standing in front of him. But even if the son hadn't been who he was, the facts remained. The officers had acted without cause. The mother had been humiliated in public. The bystanders had witnessed everything. This wasn't something that would just disappear. The sergeant turned back to the mother. "I understand you're upset." She took a step forward, her eyes sharp. "No, you don't. You don't understand what it feels like to be standing in a parking lot, minding your business, only to have people with badges decide you don't belong there. You don't understand what it's like to have hands on your things, on your body, like you don't have the right to say no. And you certainly don't understand what it's like to know that if my son hadn't shown up, this could have ended much worse." The weight of her words settled over the sergeant, but he didn't argue. What could he say? That it wasn't personal. That they were just doing their jobs. That line had been used too many times before, and it never changed anything. The crowd around them had grown, murmurs passing between the onlookers. Some were angry. Others just wanted to see how this would end. But one thing was clear: people weren't looking away. A voice from the crowd spoke up. Are they going to apologize, or are they just going to stand there? The sergeant inhaled slowly, turning back to the officers. The second one, who had been less aggressive, looked like he wanted to be anywhere but here. The first officer, the one who had started this, kept his expression locked in place, but there was something uneasy in his stance. "Officer Daniels," the sergeant said, his voice carrying authority. "Do you have anything to say?" For the first time, the officer looked directly at the mother. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out at first. He swallowed, his throat working, before finally speaking. "Ma'am," his voice was stilted, uneasy. "If there was any misunderstanding, I regret that." The mother raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "That's not an apology." Her son let out a short breath, shaking his head. Unbelievable. The tension hung in the air, thick and unmoving. The sergeant turned back to the mother. "Ma'am, I will personally make sure this is investigated. If any policies were violated, action will be taken." She studied him, trying to gauge if there was any real sincerity in his words. She had heard promises before, empty words meant to quiet situations like this. But she had also lived long enough to know when someone was trying to do damage control. "Investigated," she repeated. "And what does that mean? A few meetings behind closed doors? A note in a file? Maybe a temporary desk assignment?" The sergeant didn't answer right away. She shook her head. "No, that's not enough." The son crossed his arms, his jaw tightening. What's going to stop this from happening to someone else? What's going to make sure the next woman, someone who doesn't have a son with influence, someone without cameras watching, doesn't get treated even worse? The question lingered, unanswered. The sergeant exhaled sharply and glanced at the officers again. He knew there was no easy way out of this, no quick fix that would make everyone walk away satisfied. The situation had already unraveled past the point of repair. Another voice came from the crowd. Maybe they should be answering to more than just their boss. The murmurs grew louder. The shift was happening. This wasn't just about this one moment anymore. It was about everything that came before it, every story just like this one, every time someone had walked away without consequences. The mother met the surgeon's gaze. "We're not letting this go." Her son nodded. "You can either do the right thing now, or deal with what happens when the world hears about it." The surgeon knew a warning when he heard one, and he knew they weren't bluffing. He took another slow breath, his eyes scanning the crowd, the recording phones, the two officers who had put him in this position. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. And still, the question remained, what happens next? The night air felt charged, thick with unspoken words and restless energy. The mother stood with her son, unshaken, refusing to move until real accountability was on the table. The crowd had grown, people stepping in closer, their murmurs turning into clear demands. Some were whispering about calling the news, others were already sending the video clips out, and in the middle of it all, the officers stood frozen, unsure of their next move. The sergeant shifted his weight, his eyes scanning the faces around him. He could feel control slipping through his fingers. Every second that passed was another step closer to this turning into something much bigger than just a traffic stop gone wrong. His officers weren't just facing the anger of one woman anymore. They were facing an entire community that had seen this happen too many times before. The mother exhaled slowly, keeping her voice calm but firm. "So what's it going to be?" The sergeant hesitated. He knew he had to say something, but what could he offer that would actually de-escalate this? A forced apology wouldn't be enough. A promise of an internal review would sound empty. The usual strategies weren't going to work tonight. Before he could speak, the son took a step forward. His voice was steady, but there was a sharpness to it, the kind that made people listen. "You don't get to walk away from this like nothing happened. Not this time." His eyes locked onto the officers who had stopped his mother. "You thought you could just push her around. You thought she'd be too afraid to fight back." He shook his head, his jaw clenched. "But you messed with the wrong woman." A few people in the crowd murmured in agreement, their voices growing louder. One of the officers, the quieter one, finally spoke, his voice low, almost unsure. We weren't trying to." The son cut him off. Don't try to spin this." His eyes darkened. "You knew exactly what you were doing." The first officer, the one who had led the search, exhaled sharply, looking toward the sergeant for guidance. But the sergeant was still silent, still calculating. The mother tilted her head slightly. "You didn't expect to be questioned, did you?" Her voice was steady, measured. "You thought this would go like every other time. You stop someone, intimidate them, dig through their things without cause. And when it's over, you move on like nothing happened." She took a step forward. "But now you're stuck, because the world is watching." The weight of her words pressed down on the officers, the tension so thick it felt suffocating. The crowd was shifting again, more people pulling out their phones, making sure everything was caught from every angle. The son glanced at them, then back at the sergeant. "Do you know how fast this is going to spread?" he asked, his voice almost conversational, but laced with something deeper. "You think this is bad now? Give it an hour. Give it 2. He took another step closer. "By morning, your department is going to have a lot of explaining to do." The sergeant's face remained unreadable, but his silence spoke volumes. He was trapped between his officers and the growing unrest. And then, another car pulled up. It was sleek, dark, and official-looking. The crowd turned, the murmurs shifting into a new wave of speculation. The door opened, and a man stepped out. Older, dressed sharp but practical. His presence alone seemed to command attention. The mother's expression didn't change, but her eyes narrowed slightly. She knew exactly who this was. The commissioner. Her son tensed beside her, his body going rigid. This was the last piece to fall into place, the moment everything was about to shift. The officers straightened immediately, their faces pale. The sergeant took a step back, his posture stiff. The commissioner walked forward, his expression unreadable. His eyes flicked between the mother, the son, the officers, and the growing crowd. He wasn't just here as a city official, he was here as a father. He stopped a few feet away from the sergeant. The air around them felt electric, everyone waiting for what would happen next. The mother met his gaze, and for the first time that night, she allowed herself to feel the exhaustion creeping in. "You see what they did?" she asked, her voice quieter but no less sharp. The commissioner didn't answer right away. He turned his gaze to the sergeant. "Tell me," he said evenly, "what exactly happened here?" The sergeant hesitated. He looked at his officers, then back at the commissioner. His mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Because there was no excuse, not one that would hold. The commissioner's face remained calm, but there was a fire in his eyes. He took another step forward, just enough to make the officers shift nervously. "You searched my wife," he said slowly, without cause, without a warrant, without explanation. His voice didn't rise, but it didn't need to. "I want to hear you say it." The first officer, Daniels, swallowed hard. "Sir, we were responding to a call." The commissioner held up a hand, stopping him. "A call that conveniently led you to the wife of the man who oversees this department." He tilted his head slightly, his voice sharpening. "What exactly did that call say?" Silence. The crowd had gone quiet now, the tension at its highest point. The mother folded her arms, watching the officers squirm. Her son exhaled sharply, shaking his head. He had seen this before, officers who were quick to act, but suddenly lost their voices when accountability came knocking. The commissioner turned to his wife, his voice gentler now. "Are you okay?" She nodded once, but the fire in her eyes hadn't dimmed. "I will be," she said, "when they answer for this." The commissioner nodded, turning back to the sergeant. "I'm waiting." The sergeant inhaled, his shoulders stiff. He knew there was no way out of this, not without consequences, not without fallout. He glanced at his officers one last time, but none of them had anything to say. And then, for the first time, he looked at the crowd, the cameras, the expectant faces, the people who weren't going to let this go. He took a slow breath, then finally spoke. And when he did, the entire street seemed to hold still, because whatever he said next was going to change everything. The sergeant inhaled sharply, his face unreadable. He had been backed into a corner, and he knew it. His officers were watching him, waiting for direction. The commissioner's eyes burned into him, steady and unwavering. The crowd had gone silent, their cameras locked on the moment, on the tension that had reached its breaking point. Finally, the sergeant's lips parted. He hesitated, then started again. "We may have acted prematurely." The words barely left his mouth before the murmurs started up again. A vague admission, careful and calculated. Not quite an apology, but a hint of one. Not enough. The son let out a slow, bitter laugh. "That's what you've got. Acted prematurely." He shook his head, eyes locked onto the officers. "You didn't act prematurely. You violated her rights. You've humiliated her. And now, because my father is here, you suddenly have regrets." He took another step forward, his voice cutting through the air. "You didn't expect her to have power, did you?" Daniels, the officer who had led the search, shifted uncomfortably. The weight of the night was pressing down on him now, harder than ever. He opened his mouth, as if to say something, but then a sudden voice from the crowd rang out. "Then why'd they run her plates before they even stopped her?" The street seemed to freeze. The mother stiffened, the son's jaw clenched. The commissioner's expression darkened instantly. The sergeant turned sharply toward the crowd, his eyes scanning for the source of the voice. "What did you say?" A man near the back stepped forward. He was holding up his phone, his screen glowing in the night. "I was across the street when they pulled in," he said. "Saw them run her plates before they even got out of the car." He turned the screen, showing a video he had been recording long before the situation had escalated. In it, the officers were still in their cruiser, one of them typing something into the dashboard computer. Moments later, they got out and approached her. The mother's stomach twisted. That meant they had been looking for her before they ever made contact. The commissioner's expression remained eerily calm, but something in his posture shifted. He turned to the sergeant. "You ran her plates before she was even a suspect." His voice was cold, measured. Daniels opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The mother's voice was quiet but sharp. "Who told you to look for me?" The crowd was holding its breath now, sensing something even bigger unfolding. The sergeant hesitated. And then the commissioner said something that made the air shift completely. "Were you targeting my family?" The question landed like a thunderclap. The crowd erupted into new murmurs, voices overlapping, people looking between the officers and the commissioner, trying to piece it together. The mother's pulse pounded in her ears, because it made sense now. The way they had approached her, the immediate search, the refusal to explain themselves. This wasn't just about a mistaken identity. The son's face darkened. "Answer the question." Daniel's breathing had become uneven. He looked to the sergeant again, as if waiting for permission to speak. The sergeant's face was pale now. He swallowed hard, and then he made a choice. He turned to the commissioner, his voice tight. "We received an anonymous tip about suspicious activity in this area." The commissioner's eyes didn't waver. "And that led you straight to my wife?" The sergeant hesitated again. And that's when the mother knew. The son clenched his fists. "Someone sent you after her." The realization was sinking in, heavy and undeniable. This wasn't random. Someone had wanted this to happen. Someone had wanted her in this exact position, humiliated, searched, powerless. But they had underestimated her. The mother exhaled slowly, keeping her voice steady. "Who?" The surgeon's jaw was locked, his face tense. "I don't have that information." The son let out a sharp breath. "That's a lie." Daniels was shifting again, his discomfort growing. The mother's eyes locked onto him, seeing something flicker in his face. Guilt, hesitation, a secret pressing at the edges of his silence. And then, just as she opened her mouth to push him further, a second car pulled up. Black, unmarked, tinted windows. And just like that, the energy shifted again. The commissioner's head turned toward the new arrival, his entire body going rigid. The officers stiffened. The crowd quieted. The mother exchanged a glance with her son. Something was happening, something none of them had expected. And whatever it was about to change everything. The street had gone completely still. Every eye was locked on the black, unmarked car, its tinted windows reflecting the flashing red and blue lights. The mother felt her pulse quicken. She glanced at her son, who was watching just as intently, his body tensed like he was ready for anything. The commissioner remained motionless, his expression unreadable, but she could see it, the flicker of something in his eyes. Recognition. The door opened slowly, and out stepped a man in a dark suit. He moved with a quiet authority, his gaze sweeping across the scene, taking everything in with an unsettling calm. The officers shifted uncomfortably, their unease deepening. Even the sergeant straightened, as if instinctively bracing himself. The mother studied the man carefully. He wasn't just another officer. He wasn't even just another official. There was something deeper here, something calculated. And then she noticed it, the faint nod he exchanged with the sergeant. A silent message, one that spoke volumes. The commissioner took a slow step forward, his voice measured. "What are you doing here?" The man in the suit didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned toward the mother, his eyes scanning her face like he was memorizing every detail. "Mrs. Carter," he finally said, his tone polite but distant. "Are you all right?" The mother narrowed her eyes. "I will be when someone tells me what's really going on." The son crossed his arms. "And who exactly are you?" The man turned to him, offering a small, unreadable smile. Someone who needs to make sure this situation is handled properly. He glanced at the crowd, then back at the commissioner. We wouldn't want unnecessary attention. The commissioner's jaw clenched. A little late for that. The mother could feel it now, that something was shifting beneath the surface, a truth just out of reach. "Who sent you?" she asked. The man didn't flinch. "You don't need to worry about that." The son scoffed. "That's not an answer." The man sighed, finally turning toward the sergeant. "You should dismiss your officers," he said simply, "before this situation escalates further." The sergeant hesitated. His grip on control was already slipping, and now, with this new presence, he was caught between two forces, one he had been taking orders from, and one he couldn't afford to defy. The commissioner's voice was cold. "I want to know who gave the order to target my wife." The man in the suit met his gaze, then exhaled as if debating something. Then finally he said, "It wasn't an order, it was a request." The crowd stirred again. The mother felt a chill crawl up her spine. From who? The man hesitated for the first time, his composure slipping just slightly. And then he said something that made her breath catch. "Someone who wanted to send a message." The words landed like a blow. The commissioner's expression darkened. "A message to me." The man didn't deny it. The son stepped forward, his anger rising. "So you used her? You sent officers to harass her just to get to him?" His voice was sharp, cutting through the night. "Is that what this is?" The man's silence was the only confirmation they needed. The mother's hands curled into fists. It had never been about her at all. She had just been the easiest way to get to the commissioner, a move in someone else's game. The commissioner's voice was like steel. "Who sent the request?" The man tilted his head slightly. "You already know." And just like that, the last piece fell into place. The commissioner's body tensed, his face unreadable. He glanced at the mother, then at their son. He exhaled slowly, then turned back to the man. "Tell them they failed." His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it, one that promised this wasn't over. "And if they ever try to use my family again, they won't like how I respond." The man studied him for a long moment, then finally gave a small, approving nod. "Understood." And just like that, he turned, got back into the car, and was gone. The sergeant let out a slow breath, looking rattled in a way he hadn't before. He turned to his officers, nodding toward their vehicles. "We're done here." Daniels looked like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. One by one, the officers backed away, their presence fading as the night slowly shifted back to normal. The mother watched them go, her anger still simmering beneath the surface. The son exhaled sharply, shaking his head. "That's it," he muttered. "They just get to walk away." The commissioner put a hand on his shoulder, his grip firm but reassuring. "Not forever." His voice was quiet but certain. "This isn't over." The mother looked at him, searching his face. "What aren't you telling me?" The commissioner hesitated, then finally sighed. "There are things at play that I can't say." "Not yet." He met her gaze, his eyes full of quiet intensity. "But I promise you I will make this right." The son frowned. "And if they come back?" The commissioner's face hardened. "Then they'll regret it." The mother exhaled, finally allowing herself to breathe. She wasn't sure what was coming next. But she did know one thing. She wasn't going to be anyone's pawn ever again. The crowd slowly began to disperse, murmurs fading into the night. The cameras had captured everything, the truth already spreading far beyond this street. And somewhere, whoever had pulled the strings tonight was watching. But they had made a mistake. Because now, the commissioner wasn't just reacting. He was ready. The night air still carried the weight of everything that had happened. The flashing lights faded one by one as the last of the officers drove off, leaving behind an uneasy silence. The mother stood still, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, trying to process it all. Her son stood beside her, his jaw still clenched, his hands resting on his hips as he stared at the empty street where the officers had been. The commissioner, as always, remained composed, but there was a tension in his posture, a quiet storm brewing beneath his calm expression. The crowd that had gathered was thinning, but people lingered, whispering among themselves. The video footage had already spread. There was no containing it now. The truth was out, or at least the part of it that had played out in front of witnesses. But the deeper truth, the one that hadn't been spoken aloud, was still hanging in the air. Someone had orchestrated this. Someone had wanted to rattle them, to send a message. The mother turned to the commissioner, her voice low. "You knew, didn't you?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "I had a suspicion." She let out a breath, shaking her head. "And you didn't think to warn me?" His face softened, and for the first time that night, his voice wasn't the voice of a public figure. It was just her husband speaking. "I didn't know it would come to this." He hesitated. "I didn't think they'd go after you." The son scoffed, folding his arms. "Well, they did. And now what?" His eyes flickered with frustration. "They think they can just walk away from this." The commissioner shook his head. "No. They think they've made their move, and they're waiting to see how I respond." He exhaled slowly, but they underestimated something. The mother raised an eyebrow. "And what's that?" The commissioner glanced between them, then at the empty street ahead. "They thought they could use fear. They thought if they pushed hard enough, I backed down." He met her gaze, his voice steady. "But now they've made this personal." The son let out a small laugh, but there was no humor in it. "And now they have to deal with you." A ghost of a smile flickered across the commissioner's lips. "Exactly." The mother studied him for a long moment, searching for the full truth. "And do you know who they are?" The commissioner didn't answer right away. He looked at her, then at their son, measuring his words. "I have a strong idea," he admitted, "but I can't say anything, not yet." The son frowned. "Why?" "Because this isn't just about me," the commissioner said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's bigger than that." He turned back to his wife. "But I swear to you, I will protect this family, no matter what." She exhaled slowly, nodding. "You'd better." The son sighed, rubbing the back of his head. "So what now?" "We just go home and pretend like nothing happened." "No," the mother said simply. She looked around, seeing the last of the onlookers drifting away. "We remember this. We don't let it go." The commissioner nodded, "And we stay ready." The mother took one last glance at the street, at the place where everything had unraveled. Then she turned and started walking toward her car. The son followed, still buzzing with frustration, but a little calmer now. The commissioner lingered for a moment, watching the street in silence, his mind already working. Then, with a slow exhale, he followed his family. The night had been long. The battle wasn't over. But they had faced it, and they weren't backing down.